we're getting ready with the next speaker. He has a very interesting presentation from what I heard, with a very interesting name. I'm going to introduce him while he's getting ready. And a man who believes in the potential of decentralization more than anyone, from what I heard. He has a strong background in technical entrepreneurship, has co-founded 3 different startups. He has his own agency, or ran his own agency in New York for 5 years, rather. Currently, he's responsible for usability, SDK tools, venture projects, and much more than that. So he's gonna talk to you. He's still getting ready, but so I will chit chat. But he's gonna talk about Base-App and Cryptoanarchy. I have no idea how those two combine. I'm sure he will do much better job presenting his own presentation than I'm. Give a round of applause to Stoyan Vasilev, please.
Put the red dot. Oh, okay, cool. All right. Well, thank you for staying this late to hear my presentation. I know you're all tired and you want to go to the after party next door. So my name is Stoyan. There's one part that I want to adjust, and this is an old bio. Actually, currently I facilitate the development of the aeternity Base-App wallet and browser, and can also help with usability, but mostly to the browser. So who am I? We already covered this for the most part. I'm also trained in fine art. This is me 10 years ago at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, just as a viewer of an art piece by Irvin Worm, who's a cool guy. So what is the Base-App wallet? I'd like to introduce the wallet just very quickly, and then talk about our process, and finally have a discussion about decentralization versus walled gardens and Cryptoanarchy, maybe. So who here does not know what the Base-App is? Great. So I can go faster then. So the Base-App is available in 3 places. The 2, let's see if this works. Oh, great. The 2 app stores, and this place that we really like as well, called the Open Internet, which is sometimes open, sometimes less open. So everyone here has tried the Base-App, so we don't need these codes. Let's skip ahead. So what are we trying to accomplish here? So, well, the big goal is crypto everywhere. And we've been hearing that for a long time, but it's not quite clear how we're going to get there. So let's get more specific. What exactly are we doing? A lot of people are wondering, crypto was a buzzword 2 years ago. It's kind of not so much of a buzzword now, but what are we actually doing in the meantime to accomplish the previous goal? And how are we getting support from others to do it? So in our case, we're working on this portal. It takes a lot of effort, and then the product is sometimes exciting and sometimes less exciting. We use very bright colors to make things more accessible for people to understand. That is popular in places like China, and not so popular bright colors in other places. So we have a few different audiences to address. What it comes down to actually with this wallet and apps browsing experience is that we basically have this tension between 2 different audiences. Our like regular users want to make sure that they can send and receive, make accounts. I have a lot of accounts, but not a lot of tokens in them. So it's happening on the test net. We also support the naming system, and then there's browsing, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a moment. So we basically have an audience that wants to be able to send tokens reliably and safely, and this, in our case, includes support for the Ledger hardware wallet and for AirGap, and as well as obviously regular wallets. Users are often mystified by how they are supposed to work with crypto. So we're dealing with these people that have a hard time to begin with. And then simultaneously with this audience, we also need to support this ecosystem stuff, I've called it. It's basically all the new features and functionality that Eternity has promised to the world and is here to deliver, which are, as we occasionally discover, difficult to make happen in production. There's a lot of challenges, there's a lot of complexity, where we heard today that crypto is similar to where the internet was in '93. So things are early, and it can be difficult to get stuff working. And what is the stuff we're talking about? More specifically, the naming system, which will, after the next hard fork, be come to much bigger part of its potential. Would be live in production. Will also include bidding, state channels, which is what this is about. And we also, the base app has this. It's a layer that basically, when successful, allows other applications to do less on their own and to rely on us to do important things such as handling account and authentication. We work with others. It's not always easy to do that, especially when it's in a distributed and occasionally decentralized way. There's lots of challenges to do that. And it's not always so glamorous. You may think it's like something like this, but it's actually more like this. And so, more specifically about the base app team, currently there's 3 engineers and 1 magician. That's me. It's not quite clear what I do on a day-to-day basis, but basically everything that the engineers don't do, I need to make sure it happens by doing it myself, or getting some other people to do it. It's open source, and that means that you can see its development, all of it in under this repository here, under the Eternity account. We work in 2-week sprints. We release at least once per sprint, usually often twice. And how or where we deploy is to the app stores, then also to the internet. And for the app stores, there's actually, it may appear that there's like 1 deployment, but it's actually 3 different deployments. There's alpha or closed testing, which is a handful of people have access to that. Then there's beta public testing, and then there's like actually getting approved to be publicly released. And then we also do usability testing that's kind of in parallel to this track, to make sure we get a lot more sort of qualitative input, and also get it before it goes in the App Store. So what do you mean by transparent? Literally, it's all on GitHub. We use milestones to reflect the sprints, issues for every task that we have, and labels as needed. We do make use of this thing called ZenHub, which is we're using instead of projects. It actually makes our life a lot easier. Unfortunately, you need to have a ZenHub account to see all of this stuff in the ZenHub view. It's actually the same issues and the same task and the same milestones, so you're not missing out all that much if you don't go into ZenHub. What you are missing out is we have this thing called the release board, and basically at the beginning of every sprint, we plan what we're going to release at the end of the sprint or in the middle of the sprint if we have more than 1 release per sprint. And there you can actually get a kind of a sense of the future, I mean, short future. And so that's what you're missing out. And if you feel like that's something important to you, you can make a ZenHub account. I think that it's actually public. You just need to install the extension. And we depend on a lot of people. Each one of these bullet points has multiple people, except for JavaScript has 1 or 2 only, but the other ones have more people involved, like protocol development in particular. We need the nodes to be running. We need the JavaScript SDK is super important for us because most of the functionality is based on that. Rely on the middleware, and then we also rely on these deployment platforms, which we're going to talk about in a moment. And then there's who depends on us. That's very important. Again, we have the first audience, which is people that just need to send money around or tokens around, and then people who need other functionality, and apps developers who are basically these like sort of breakthrough technology and entrepreneurs moving forward. So that's a lot of fun, as you can tell already. And I want to give you 1 or a couple of examples of some of the challenges we've run into, and then open a discussion for the broader implications of these challenges. So how long does it take to get something up there? Well, for the progressive web app, as soon as we're done with the testing, it's very close to instant. Like we tag in GitHub, we get it onto the server, and then it's available. For Android, it's not as instant, but most of the time you can kind of get it to a day. You upload the build to the different tracks, and then for the most part, they don't really do any kind of review that could be a showstopper. At least so far, we haven't had an issue with that. We have had some issues in China, but I'll talk about that in a moment. And then for iOS, it's a bit of a mystery how long it's going to take. So is the App Store really taking an issue with crypto? Well, what if it's not really clear? We kind of assume that we live in a predictable environment, that we know what the rules are, until we realize that that's no longer true. We don't actually know. So people have different opinions on like what's right and what's wrong, and also what's easy. So, which is partially why we're all here. We're trying to find the balance. On one side of the spectrum is Cryptoanarchy. On the other side of the spectrum is like users wanting to do whatever they need to do and don't really care how or through which platform. And then we have different people within the base app who, or users who use the base app who have different opinions on like what's good to use or what they would like to use. So this slide is actually here because of Pivo. Is Pivo here? No, he's not here. Okay. So Pivo said, well, we have this progressive web app which works in mobile. I love using web apps and they're the future, and therefore, why do I even need a native app? So he's kind of like that guy. And then there's other people who just assume if you say you have certain functionality, they're like, oh, they immediately go to the App Store and they're like, well, where is it? Like, just give me the name and I'll go to the App Store, download it. They don't even think that, before the App Stores, you just went on internet to find what you're looking for. And we have to, like I mentioned before, we have to cover both. Like we can't just, ignore one or the other. And we try to do this with empathy. To address their issues. So occasionally we run into censorship. How does that happen? So it happens in different ways for different reasons. For example, in China, we they just received a message that we're no longer in the Chinese version of Android Play Market, and then I was like, okay, well, that process has started. And so what I did is I found out that this is not specific to the Eternity project. It's something that most or many crypto projects have to deal with. So how do they deal with it? Basically, you could switch your app store to the Hong Kong store. You can download the APK directly from GitHub and install it, or you could use a VPN, I think, to access the same store, but somehow as if it's not you or something. I didn't quite understand that part, and we're looking deeper into it. We're actually going to make a guide for Chinese people. First, we're going to make it in English, then we're going to translate it to Chinese that gives them all their options. So that's one kind of censorship we've encountered. Another kind of censorship, if you will, or asking us to change something in this case, is from Apple. So Apple has this like beautiful guideline, which I will show you in a moment. You of course read what I'm writing, but the most important part, what is written here, this is directly from them. So apparently cryptocurrency through Web3 was not appropriate. What's the solution? We'll get rid of it. And here's why. So this is a lot of stuff. So this 4.7 is really like 7 different points. There's like a hidden point in here. We conflict hard with 3 of these, and we kind of have some issues with 2, 3, 4 more of the rest. So basically, this whole point is quite an issue. But the biggest issues are here. So So this is basically saying if you're going to have HTML HTML5 functionality running inside your app, which is non-embedded, meaning it's you're not submitting as part of the binary. It's basically the decentralized application model. You need to follow these rules, and the kind of the more interesting ones for us are you need to make sure that the people who are writing this functionality, meaning the app developers, the decentralized app developers, are registered with the Apple program and have signed their license agreement, which is currently we don't make an effort to enforce that. We actually can't because we don't have a hard-coded list of what you can open there and what you cannot open there. So this is another interesting one. Does not provide access to real money, gaming lotteries, or charitable donations. So we don't really enforce, and we don't necessarily. I wouldn't say we have a way of enforcing what you do with crypto. Like if somebody deployed an application that's gambling, we don't make an active effort to somehow block you from using it. And then there's also the issue of digital commerce, which is, you could argue that, decentralized application, I could sell you anything, that's kind of the point. We exchange money. Maybe you get something in return for your money. And then the other thing that's actually quite the big deal for them, which is maybe like you could argue that it's what their business is built on, is it they don't want us to show anything in a store or a store-like interface. So that's basically exactly what we're doing. So it's not fun to deal with rules, and I'm here to tell you how we're currently working with them and to open up later for a discussion on what this looks like in the long term. So what's our strategy? So first, how are other people dealing with this? So we're not obviously the only people who are like trying to deploy decentralized applications through native applications on these mobile platforms. This right here is Coinbase Wallet, which I think is quite a good, used to be good UX browser. I mean, good browser in terms of UX by Coinbase. They have two apps. One is like their buy and sell crypto, and the other one's for this wallet stuff. So they used to have this like nice, beautiful page, which was basically an app store like interface right here. And as you can see, it's no longer there. So I'm assuming that they had to deal with the same challenges we are, and their solution was to do this. Same with Trust Wallet, I believe this is. You can see apparently the list is just not available, so use the search. Cypher actually hasn't been updated in a while, I think like a year. So I think they somehow, I think they basically, in most cases, reject when you're making a new or trying to make a new release. So I think they haven't made a new release, therefore they haven't been asked to take this list down. And so to understand this idea of an app store running inside an app, it's kind of interesting to think about, like, what's a browser and what's a wallet and where does crypto live? So this is our take on it, or like an early version of it. By the way, this is never like this is never meant to be the final destination. This interface is just like we develop quickly, like I mentioned before, and we try to get everything up as quickly as possible. So this is basically what one would call a wallet with a browser in it, and this is a browser. This is Opera Touch with a wallet in it. How this works is you open Opera, you click on this settings button, which is in the bottom right here. And then from there, you get this wallet, which you need to activate first. And then you have this little button here, which basically takes you to this list of apps, which is basically a web page. So there's now a question, is this an app store? It's a website, with a list of apps. So maybe that's okay. Maybe if you have a browser with a web page in it that has decentralized application, that's okay, but somehow this is not okay because it's a wallet with a browser in it. That's one way to look at it. Well, how are these two things very different? Well, it turns out in iOS, at least, they're not. The reason why they're not is because in iOS, every browser is a Safari web view, which is the same thing. So this is a Safari web view. And when you open the app inside here, it's also a Safari web view, and it's the same thing here. It's Safari web view. So there is no real difference. We're more in this kind of scenario. It's just that when you think about Opera Touch with a crypto wallet, you're thinking, oh, that's a browser with a wallet. And when you look at the base app, you think, oh, that must be a wallet with a browser in it. It's a little bit different in, sorry, I'm skipping ahead. It's a little bit different in Android because there you could actually have different rendering engines in the browser. So it's not exactly the same, but it's kind of the same because at the end of the day, you're still going to put a rendering engine and then some UI around it. And then you choose the functionality that goes with that, such as like bookmarks or crypto or saving form filling. So what are we doing right now? So that spectrum that I showed earlier with the guy with the riot behind him and then the App Store meme is that like basically if on one side is like our values of the open web, and on the other side is like users wanting to do things, not caring how to do them, like we're on the spectrum. We need to figure out, like, as we get resistance back from these closed from these walled gardens, how we're going to deal with that. And one way to deal with it is to do the stuff a little bit on the outside. So for example, the wallet and the application are not so tightly coupled, meaning it's not necessarily you running application in the wallet. So one way to do that with the current application without completely doing it is to do that, to basically open in the browser, authenticate, and then come back. If we are concerned about the fact that it's kind of inconvenient to go back and forth between the wallet and the application, we may do some fancy functionality like this guy is doing here, where we pre-authenticate some sort of balance to be used in that app, so they don't have to go back and forth. Or we maybe have a generalized account that's somehow like citing automatically. Like, this is kind of the fancy stuff that we're prepared to deal with, which means that we're actually not going to give up. No matter what happens, no matter what you throw at us, we're gonna go at it. So I want to open the floor for discussion, questions, and also to if you're curious about, like, what would happen in the future. But before I do that, I just want to put out here that we love to get feedback. Telegram is one really good way to do it if you're a developer, which many of people here are. GitHub issues is another. And I also wanted to throw in a couple of extra memes because I really like them. So this is what happens when you do engineering for a while. So please be kind to us when you give us feedback. It's not an easy task. And then the other thing is never give up. So if he can do it, then we can all do it.
Yeah, round of applause, I think, guys. I think we have the first question right here. Been pulling his hand all the time.
Slightly controversial question. Feel free to shoot me down. How would you guys react to, first of all, Eternity having its own wallet plugin, which means that regular browsers are probably going to be able to interact? Mm-hmm. And second of all, pretty much something that was seen today from the generalized account presentation, you can even currently probably use Ethereum-based wallets, which means you can even use MetaMask to do the same interactions. So where does base app fit in this ecosystem, and why should one choose to use it through the base app rather than regular web application?
Sure. So I didn't mention this because it's kind of like skipping quite quick through the slides, but right now the base app has already experimented with a number of different ways to basically inject the account into the application or give the application access to the account in a secure way that the user can control, so they could revoke it easily. One of those ways is to put what we've been calling a reverse iframe, which is basically injecting a version of the base app without the UI in there. That's one way. Another one was to run it inside the browser. I'm actually not a huge fan of that idea because I think that it's better if developers can kind of do their own thing and then just get access to the accounts in some semi-magical way, so that it's not a burden for the user, and it's not like a burden for them. I think that it's interesting. Like on the surface, it looks like the base app's mostly like a wallet to send and receive, and you're like, okay, is it like MetaMask, or is it like this other thing? What it comes down to actually on the conceptual level, beyond whether we injected the UI-less version, or if we use if we force people, or not force, but if we give them the opportunity to open the app inside the base app, is that many of the developers don't want to do this account handling. They would rather we provide this for them, and so they don't have to deal with it, and that makes their job simpler, as long as, of course, it's easy. Otherwise, it's maybe easier to do it themselves. Hopefully, we meet that goal. And they don't. I mean, of course, they care. That's why it'd be good if Pivo was here, because I think they've had interesting. When we did the first voting app, when we had to support signing with a ledger, and then it was also signing with the ERC20 token and air gap and all these things. So, and then there was the reverse iframe. So all these things kind of converged. I don't think the question is so much like what's the best solution, because that might actually change. Like what makes sense today may not make sense tomorrow, because the App Store rejected it, or because developers evolved, or some other new better way to do something came out. What's important is two things. One is that we pay attention to the need of the developers, that they basically we give them what they want. And the other thing is we have to make sure it's easy for the user, and we don't quite know that. Like, I could throw in some sort of anecdotal statistics of how many users MetaMask has versus, some other wallet that's not in the browser or in the browser. But the thing is, it's so early on, and many of these users right now that are just sending tokens around, they're not the same people that we're talking about later when we support these decentralized applications. So I think the trick is to give developers what they need, make sure it's easy for the user, and keep evolving continuously, because there's no like one right answer that's going to be true today that's going to be true later.
I think you've been singling out Pivo, so I'm just going to give him the mic. So
you're here.
Yes, I'm here. I think for the developer, it doesn't matter, or for the user even, it doesn't matter where the wallet is, as long as he can interact with it, right? And for the first voting app, what we did is we made a small library that checks in a certain order for all the possible wallet integrations that we support, with the reverse iframe and with in the base app, and we did even support MetaMask, and maybe in the future we will support wallet for things like this. And as long as the developer has the library that interacts with any wallet, it shouldn't matter where the wallet is. And I think in general, I like base app because you have this frame where all your apps are inside, and it works really well for us. And I don't know, I like the UI kinda. If we could optimize it, sure, but
yeah.
I think it fits well if I have aeternity app interact with my aeternity account and my aeternity apps, to have it all inside this frame. May not be right for all developers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you want to retort?
I forgot to mention one thing, which people just made me realize, is like we're not. It may seem, because I was talking about the base app, that we're like basically working on one product or offering one solution. The reality is that we're also trying together with the wallet extension, Milan's giving the next talk, and to also put up, make these best practices and create them as standards through the expansions. It's helpful that Pivo and Emil are next to each other, so it reminds me that those two are related. But so we're trying to do this so that it works for any wallet. We're not here to necessarily be like the wallet or the browser or whatever. It's more like, how can we make this easy for everyone being the user and the developers, and also for future wallets and future users and future developers. And that's why we're doing these expansions to set that up.
Let's
and also for the whole.
Two more questions.
You just mentioned the deep linking thing. Why haven't we done it yet? I remember being involved in some specking of it. Is it also because of the missing feature, I think, for callbacks back into web applications?
Yes. So, as Michał pointed out earlier, things that look simple often turn out to be very complex underneath the hood. You're right, like there's some limitation around coming back from the deep link. And then there's also a question of how does that work? Does it is it the kind of thing where the SDK is handling everything on the low level, or do we actually going back and forth between the apps? So there's like different reasons. The main reason why we haven't done it, and Emil may have another opinion because he was coordinating this before me, is that we actually, like I pointed out in the beginning, we were like me and 3 engineers, and we're trying to do all these things like be reliable and look forward to the future, support state channels and whatever else, naming system, whatever else comes next. And so we have to prioritize what's important. And previously, it wasn't so prioritized because there are different requirements, like, for example, to support the ledger. And so they're like, okay, we're going to build a desktop version to make sure that that's supported. And then, so we basically, there was more, we're targeting shotgun style, as I like to call it, where you shoot in different directions, trying to cover as much ground as possible. I think that as we get more experience and we go past things like the token migration and stuff, like we actually need to be more focused and say like this, we're only going to try to do these 2 things. We're going to try and do them well. And I think deep linking is currently one of the better options, but we need to test them.
Let's take another one. There was a hand there for a while. Oh, right. So wait. There was one more man over here. Oh, you forgot it? Okay, wait. Let's take 2 more guys and that's it, because otherwise. So what, the first person was here?
So are you maybe thinking of putting some warning at base app developers or something? Because as I see it, it's just a matter of time before they are going to pull you from the app store or something like that. So as a base app developer, it's kind of hard to build business, and if they shut down the base app, my business is gone.
Yeah,
right.
So that's a great question, and I was actually hoping that the discussion would go more in that direction, because I think that's kind of what we really need to think about. I don't think it's like you presented in kind of a more of a deal breaker type of like perspective. I think that it's actually quite reasonable to think that these app stores would, which is kind of why I called it the talk this, would, let's go back to that slide, the controversial one. I think there's a high likelihood that, because right now we're not even so much on the radar, like they know crypto exists, but there's not so much volume that they would consider it a huge kind of conflict with their current revenue model, which for iOS take 30% of your transactions. So right now it's okay. You're saying, okay, well, with time, they're probably going to try to push us more into the corner. And what does that mean for people that are trying to build a business on top of that? And my answer to that is, and everyone else's feel free to throw your opinion, is that yes, it's very likely that they'll probably try to push us more into the corner. And what we're going to have to do is, what was that slide with this? So we're gonna have to like get creative, I think, over time, and I don't think we should give them more space than they're like pushing. You know, we should try to claim as much space until they try to push us in the corner and we push back. But I don't think they fully can. It's just tricky, like, because the worst version is, imagine right now if they're telling people, oh, just take off your landing pages so it doesn't look like an app store. In the app store, well, that's fine. But what if tomorrow they tell Opera Touch, well, we can't have a crypto wallet interacting with dApps at all. You can only have one that doesn't interact with it, or you can't have a wallet, period. Which is, they can do that, because you saw that 4.7 point, where it's like 7 different points, most of them which conflict with crypto. So they could do that. I think the trick is that we're actually very, very creative, and they're also in a way trying to stop evolution in general. And I think that we have the capacity to be creative and to figure out solutions that would go around them. And eventually, my hope is, believe that that crypto would get large enough to where it can't be ignored. It can't be that you constantly try to push us in the corner. Of course, that's a kind of a hopeful interpretation of the future. But I think we'll always be creative enough to give you a solution, maybe a little bit more painful in some situations for the user or the developer. But I think that there's also huge benefits, for example, like paying with crypto through a QR code or whatever. Like there's huge gains to be made in UX too, and by using crypto. So I don't think we can say like, oh, if they try to take us off the App Store tomorrow, we're screwed forever. I think that we could do things like even put the wallet just in the web, and then it's because we have a version of the base app, I didn't show it here, that's like base.apps.com, and there you could inject the wallet from our website. Now, how safe that is a completely different conversation, and we probably shouldn't, like I said, we shouldn't give away that ground yet, but we are creative enough to continue to, I don't know, fight back or whatever you want to call it, do this kind of business very far. And I think it's not, if I'm in your position, like building an app that's going to have business model based on crypto, I wouldn't just be like, oh, we're screwed, it's over. Like, I don't think it's over. We're going to do this.
Shall we take one last and then
okay, so I've got a question about the App Store, because currently the iOS version of the base app is pretty much useless. You cannot do you cannot interact with many D apps, many apps. I understand, if I can understand correctly, you're unable to update the version because of the really strict Apple Store guidelines. But in this case, if Apple doesn't want to cooperate and provides a really bad picture to the whole crypto community, couldn't we just replace the base app in the iOS store with an instruction on how to launch the PVA? Basically, so you could actually, even after you download the app, you would the only thing that the app would do would launch Safari with the base app open in a separate window, and now you're pretty much independent of the Apple Store guidelines unless they tell you that you're unable to open a link to a browser in a separate window. Yeah, but this is a neat workaround which would make the base app actually work on the iOS currently.
Yes. So another part I didn't mention is like when we first started getting these rejections, I spent, like, especially the second one, we tried a few different things to kind of unstick the situation quickly. And when for the second one I was like, oh, like this is serious. Like I don't think they're gonna like give up so easily this time. And I basically for like 2 days, that was the main thing I was thinking about. It's like how can we, what are all the things that we need to do to address it? And that's when I realized that if they want to take it down, they can always. Like they're like, it's just, there's enough in crypto that's in conflict with what they're trying to do that they, if they really wanted to, they can, if they really want, they could even amend their terms and just say, well, crypto, like, no. Yeah, exactly. So, but I also, we live in an exciting and fortunate time that right now they don't care so much, and it's unclear if they're enforcing their policies selectively. Like, why does Opera Touch get to have their own landing page with apps and we don't? Is it because ours doesn't look like a web page, or because I don't think it's a regular browser like Opera? There's all these question marks, and I also try to play the like, well, what about these guys game? And that doesn't work. You can't say like, why are you letting Opera Touch do this and not us? Like they're not going to respond to that. And I think most of the time it's actually different reviewers. So it's unclear if they don't understand or they do it selectively, or this reviewer doesn't get it, but the other one will. And right now they don't care about crypto, but in the future they will. It's completely unknown. But I think that we actually, like I said to him, I don't think it's like the battle's lost or anything like that. I'm just saying that like if they want to, they can push on us much harder, but we're creative enough to figure out ways around it. And also to be more specific about what you said about base app, it wasn't that the base app wasn't working or it was useless. Basically what happened was that we were planning to have this other functionality, the payment channel app running, and that was not compatible with the base app because currently the SDKs needs to be the same version between the base app and the application, and the state channel application had newer SDK, and so we couldn't put the new SDK in the base app and resubmit quickly enough because they were stuck on them thinking about the browser. So I said, okay, to unstick the situation, like in a way that's gonna work, we just remove the browser for now and we start implementing deep linking. We can actually reintroduce the browser by doing basically what Opera Touch or these other browsers are doing. We could also change the name of it, or because they actually when they rejected this the second time, they showed a link to that they opened the Graffiti app in the base app, and they're like, well, this is clearly a crypto app that's running inside your base app, read 4.7. And I was like, well, maybe since if we submit a new browser, they would still know that link if they looked at their own screenshot, maybe we could rename the Graffiti app or change the URL. So I was already thinking like weird stuff like this. But I actually think it's going to be fine for a bit as long as we stay creative. I don't have the final answer, but I also want to make sure that there's no misunderstanding that's like completely screwed. Like the base app still supports names in the App Store, still everything else except for browsing apps is there, and then we implement deep linking that will also be there, and you also have Safari on your phone and you can use that. So it's I wouldn't say.
I think that's a hot topic. That's what I think, and I think we need a panel for that next time to
sure.
discuss that. Yeah, a round of applause for Stoyan, guys. He's been answering the questions really well, I think. Thank you.